Bruce Ward stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his high-rise penthouse in downtown Chicago, staring out at the early morning skyline. It was a crisp spring day, the kind that made the lake glimmer under the sunlight. The city below bustled with energy, but inside Bruce's meticulously decorated living space there was nothing but stillness. He had just finished reading the overnight reports from Ward Enterprises, and by all accounts, things had never been better from a financial standpoint. Yet, as he sipped his coffee, he felt a pang of something that resembled regret, or perhaps emptiness. He wouldn't allow himself to dwell on that feeling for long. His smartphone buzzed on the marble kitchen counter, and he walked over to answer, spotting his ex-wife's name. Nicole Ward, now going by her maiden name again, had not called him in at least a month. He hesitated before picking up. "Good morning, Nicole," he said, with a polite tone that fell somewhere between cordial and distant. She sighed on the other end. "I'm surprised you answered, Bruce. Thought you'd be in a board meeting by now." He glanced at his watch, noting he had just enough time to finalize a few details before heading to the Riverside Hotel for an important business conference. "I have a conference to attend," he replied. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, as if reconsidering whether it was worth reaching out at all. "My sister's hosting a family get-together next week, and I figured I'd at least invite you. Your parents might be there." "Thought you'd want to see them?" Bruce flexed his shoulders, attempting to release some tension. He was never one for casual family gatherings. They felt like a waste of time, especially now that he and Nicole were divorced. "I appreciate you telling me," he said, keeping his voice even, "but I'm overwhelmed with work right now." Nicole let out a short laugh, though it lacked humor. "Of course you are. Let me guess. You'll send a gift in your place, maybe a pricey bottle of wine or something else expensive enough to impress." There was a slight twinge in Bruce's chest, a reminder that he had chosen ambition over personal connections countless times. "I'll think about it," he managed, trying to keep the conversation neutral. "Thank you for letting me know." She paused. "Take care, Bruce, and—" She trailed off, perhaps tempted to say more, but ended the call instead. He stared at the phone for a moment, then set it down. The silence of the penthouse enveloped him again. Divorced for 3 years, he was too familiar with that eerie sense of quiet. Once upon a time, Bruce believed that building Ward Enterprises into a major conglomerate would fill whatever void existed in him. The marriage and any talk of starting a family had seemed like distractions that would slow him down. He shrugged off these thoughts and grabbed his tailored suit jacket from the back of a sleek designer chair, checking his reflection in the mirror. Tall frame, neatly combed dark hair that had begun turning grey at the temples, and piercing blue eyes. He reminded himself that he was exactly where he intended to be. At 42, Bruce was a self-made millionaire CEO. That was something to be proud of, even if it had cost him personal relationships. On his way out, he scanned the living room for anything amiss. Every surface gleamed with modern elegance, from the abstract art on the walls to the state-of-the-art sound system. It was a place that broadcasted success to anyone who walked in. He locked the door behind him and stepped into the private elevator that took him down to the lobby. As the elevator descended, he mentally rehearsed his remarks for the conference, which centered around corporate growth strategies. By the time Bruce arrived at the Riverside Hotel, his polished demeanor was firmly in place. The opulent lobby was teeming with fellow executives and entrepreneurs, all exchanging introductions or sipping expensive coffee provided by the hotel staff. He recognized several faces from local business publications. Timothy Brooks, the CFO of Ward Enterprises, stood near a large marble pillar, gesturing to a colleague. Timothy caught Bruce's eye and nodded respectfully. Before Bruce could join them, his phone vibrated again. He stepped aside to answer a call from a vendor about a pending contract. Half listening to the vendor's updates, he scanned the area for a restroom. He'd wanted a quick moment of privacy to finalize the conversation. Spotting a corridor near the conference rooms, he strode that way. Distracted by the call, he pushed open a door marked with a sign he didn't fully register until it was too late. Only after taking several steps inside did he realize the elegant fixtures and layout belonged to the women's restroom. His first impulse was to exit immediately, but then he heard a muffled sob. Curiosity, along with some measure of shock, rooted him to the spot. Someone was crying, quietly but with a palpable intensity. He hesitated, uncertain if he should speak up or slip away. That was when he noticed a woman on the floor, her back against the sink, clutching a piece of paper in her hands. The moment stretched out, and, to his own surprise, he did not turn around. Instead, he stayed. Bruce stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, his conversation with the vendor fading into a mere echo. He could barely make out the woman's features in the mirror's reflection. Dark, curly hair, a uniform that looked more like a waiter's attire, and a posture that spoke of utter exhaustion. She was so engrossed in her despair that she hadn't noticed him. Overwhelmed by the urge to help, yet paralyzed by uncertainty, he ended the call abruptly and took a cautious step forward. His polished shoes clicked against the pristine tile, echoing in the hushed space. The woman lifted her gaze, startled to see a man in the women's restroom. Her teary eyes, a warm shade of brown, widened with confusion. She quickly scrambled to her feet, shoving a wrinkled letter into her pocket. "You're in the wrong bathroom," she managed, her voice trembling. I know," Bruce stammered, his face flushing. He held up his phone as if that explained everything. "I was on a call and got distracted." She nodded, still looking wary. Her cheeks were stained with tears, but she tried to mask her vulnerability by straightening her shoulders. "Right. Well, you should probably—" Before she could finish, the door swung open again, and two women entered, chatting animatedly. They both froze at the sight of Bruce. One of them let out a surprised gasp, and the other frowned. Bruce felt a wave of embarrassment, but forced a polite smile. "Apologies. I'll leave now," he said quietly, stepping past the newcomers. He backed out into the corridor, but curiosity refused to let him walk away entirely. He lingered near a vending machine by the hallway wall, watching as the two women left the restroom. They giggled about the lost guy in the ladies' room, but Bruce barely paid attention to their words. He was waiting for the woman with the tear-streaked face to emerge. When she finally did, her eyes were downcast, and she clutched the edges of her uniform jacket as though it were a shield. She headed down the corridor quickly, trying to blend into the throng of hotel staff and conference attendees. Something about her sadness gnawed at Bruce. He couldn't pinpoint why her desperation felt so familiar, but it triggered faint memories of his younger self, memories of late rent, eviction scares, and doing anything possible to keep afloat. He followed her at a safe distance, watching as she weaved through the crowd, with the efficiency of someone used to being invisible. She appeared to be around his age, maybe a few years younger, and her uniform had a small name tag that read, Elena. He caught glimpses of it whenever the overhead lights reflected off the plastic badge. She paused near a side exit marked, Staff Only, and disappeared behind it. Bruce hesitated, standing uncertainly in the busy corridor. He reminded himself that he had a speech to give later that afternoon, and that following someone he didn't know was both irrational and intrusive. Yet, he found himself pushing the door open anyway, stepping into a narrow stairwell that led to the hotel's lower floors. With each step, the air grew cooler and the noise of the lobby receded. Distant sounds of clanging dishes and rolling carts reverberated through the concrete walls. He heard muffled voices ahead, presumably other staff members. He was close to turning around when Elena's voice cut through the air, shaky but resolute. "I'm telling you, Mr. Larkin," she said, presumably on the phone. "I can come in extra shifts this weekend. I really need more hours. I'm behind on rent and my daughter's medical bills are piling up." Her voice cracked. "I can't lose our apartment." "Please, I'll do whatever needs to be done." Bruce found himself frozen on the stairwell landing, the memory of his mother's voice echoing in his mind. He remembered her pleading with landlords, neighbors, and eventually social services for enough support to keep their tiny apartment when he was just a boy. They had nearly been evicted more than once, and the shame of that fear still lingered inside him, even decades later. He leaned against the wall, straining to hear Elena's muffled words. Every bit of her conversation sent a pang of guilt and compassion through him. He heard her say something about a possible eviction notice and the medication her daughter needed. Then there was a pause, followed by a desperate, "Thank you for considering me." "Yes, I understand. Goodbye." Eleanor lowered her phone, exhaling sharply. For a moment, she stood still, shoulders trembling, before composing herself and continuing down the hall. Bruce remained hidden, contemplating what he'd just overheard. This was not a typical moment of charity or sympathy. He felt a genuine urgency to intervene, but how could he approach her? Offering a wad of cash was more likely to offend than help, especially since she clearly had pride in providing for herself. His mind spun with questions as he realized he couldn't simply walk away. With the final steps echoing behind her, Elena disappeared into a staff break room. Bruce stood alone in the dim stairwell, grappling with an unfamiliar feeling. The overpowering need to do something that would make a real difference in another person's life. Bruce returned to the main conference area, trying to refocus on the reason he was there in the first place. He was scheduled to speak about Ward Enterprises' latest expansion strategy. People milled around, many in sharp suits and polished shoes, their conversations filled with projected profit margins and upcoming acquisitions. Ordinarily, Bruce would have thrived in this environment, exuding confidence and authority. Yet, after what he had just witnessed, the atmosphere felt strangely hollow. He made his way to the conference lounge, where he was expected to prepare for his presentation. A sleek sign bearing his name stood by a series of neatly arranged chairs, reminding him that he was the headliner of the day. Timothy Brooks, his CFO, approached with an eager stride, iPad in hand. "Bruce, the attendees are nearly all seated. We should go over the slides one last time," Timothy said, a note of caution in his voice. Bruce nodded, but noticed his mind was elsewhere, still caught in the silent film reel of Elena pleading on the phone. He realized Timothy was waiting for him to speak. "Yes, let's do it," he replied briskly. Together, they reviewed the bullet points that detailed their global expansion, focusing on how Ward Enterprises would build new, high-end commercial complexes in various major cities. Normally, Bruce took pride in these ambitious plans, but now the phrase commercial complexes reminded him of the very cycle that could lead to people like Elena losing their affordable housing. Timothy paused, adjusting his rectangular glasses. He was a man in his early 50s, methodical in everything he did. He eyed Bruce curiously. "Are you feeling all right? You seem distracted." "I'm fine," Bruce replied, maybe too quickly. The CFO opened his mouth to press further, but then the event organizer approached, inviting them to take their places at the front of the room. When Bruce stepped onto the stage, applause filled the air. The microphone's hum was a familiar comfort, and he launched into his well-rehearsed presentation. He spoke about quarterly growth, rising stock values, and the importance of targeted investments. The audience scribbled notes, nodding in appreciation. Yet, beneath his polished words, there was a persistent undercurrent of disquiet. He found himself mentally drifting to the image of Elena cradling that eviction letter, her eyes brimming with tears. Midway through, he stumbled on a line he'd delivered flawlessly 100 times before. He coughed to cover his lapse and continued. Though the rest of the speech proceeded smoothly, the slip rattled him. As soon as he finished, the room erupted in applause. Timothy gave him a discreet thumbs up, and a line of people formed, eager to congratulate him or hand him business cards. Bruce shook hands automatically, wearing a polite smile he'd perfected long ago. Moments later, he retreated to a quiet corner near the conference stage, watching the crowd disperse into smaller networking circles. Timothy joined him, sipping a bottle of water. "What happened up there? You don't usually falter." "Something's on your mind," Bruce inhaled, considering how much to reveal. Timothy was loyal, but also a staunch supporter of maximizing profits. His eyes flickered toward the exit Elena had used earlier. "I just have a lot on my plate, that's all," Bruce said, hoping that would suffice. Timothy's expression tightened with mild concern. "All right, but remember that we have more meetings this afternoon. The investors from Toronto are particularly cautious. They'll want reassurance about our capacity to handle expansion costs." "Of course," Bruce replied, automatically slipping into his CEO persona. "I won't let it affect my work." Timothy nodded, but a trace of skepticism remained. After the CFO walked away, Bruce took a seat on one of the lounge chairs and let out a long exhale. He felt torn between two worlds, one where he was the confident, unshakable leader of a major corporation, and another that had been abruptly opened by a chance encounter in the women's restroom. He recalled how he had once been an ordinary kid, scraping by in rundown apartments with a single mother who worked multiple jobs. He had promised himself back then that he would never again be at the mercy of overdue bills or lack of resources. So he climbed the ladder of success, building a fortress of wealth around himself. In the process, he'd grown distant from his past and from any sense of vulnerability. His phone buzzed, drawing him out of his thoughts. It was an email notification about future development sites. He glanced at the subject line and felt a prickle of unease. So many of these sites were in neighborhoods reminiscent of the one he'd grown up in. Did forging ahead mean displacing families in the name of progress? The question gnawed at him now, fueled by Elena's plight. He knew that confronting these doubts meant looking back on a life he had worked tirelessly to leave behind. For the moment, his resolve was fragile. He still wasn't sure if he would try to find Elena again or simply file this event away as a strange encounter. He just knew that his carefully constructed world felt slightly off balance for the first time in years. That evening, after the day's sessions concluded, Bruce found himself lingering at the Riverside Hotel bar. The space was decorated with polished wood paneling and ambient lighting that gave the place a warm, subdued atmosphere. Outside the large windows, Chicago's city lights flickered, drawing patterns across the dark sky. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his third whiskey of the night, and felt the tension in his neck gradually loosen. He was usually careful about drinking, especially on evenings before big meetings, but this was the first time in a long while that he felt compelled to dull the noise in his head. He caught his reflection in the mirror behind the bar, his suit jacket draped over the stool next to him, tie slightly loosened. He looked more exhausted than usual, the faint lines around his eyes deepening in the low light. As the bartender walked by, Bruce raised 2 fingers, signaling for a refill. The bartender, a kindly older man with graying hair, obliged without comment. Bruce took a sip, letting the warmth settle in his chest. He replayed the memory of Elena in the restroom, her tear-stained cheeks, the letter in her hands, her whispered pleas on the phone. It was an image he couldn't shake. Pamela Holmes, the conference organizer, spotted him from across the bar and approached with a gentle smile. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the stool. Bruce shook his head, and she took her seat. Pamela was in her mid-40s, with a confident posture and a friendly demeanor that had always put him at ease during past events. "Tough day?" she asked, glancing at his half-empty glass. "You could say that," Bruce replied, attempting a wry smile. "These conferences can be draining." Pamela studied him a moment. "I've known you for a few years now. You've handled bigger events without blinking. Something's off today." He took a measured breath. "I had a strange encounter, that's all. It made me think about things I haven't thought about in a long time." She gave him a knowing look. "Sometimes those unexpected moments open our eyes. I always tell people that a conference is about more than business. It can also be a chance to reconnect with life outside the corporate bubble." She paused. "I'm not prying, but if you need an ear, I'm here." Bruce appreciated her concern. He hesitated, wondering how much to divulge. Eventually, he settled on a vague explanation. "I came across someone in a tough situation. It reminded me of where I started, back when I had nothing." Pamela nodded. "You've come a long way since then, Bruce. Maybe this is the universe's way of reminding you to pay it forward." He leaned back against the bar's cushioned edge. "That's the problem. I'm not sure how to help without overstepping or insulting the person's pride. Throwing money at the situation might just make things worse. And I don't even know if I have the right to intervene." Pamela drummed her fingers lightly on the wooden surface. "Paying it forward doesn't always mean writing a check. Sometimes it means listening, caring, or using your influence to create opportunities. You're in a position to do all three." He exhaled, the whiskey fueling a quiet resolve that he wasn't yet fully ready to claim. "I guess I need to figure out how." They chatted a bit longer, mostly about mundane conference details and upcoming speakers. Eventually, Pamela excused herself, leaving Bruce to the quiet hum of the bar crowd. He glanced around, noticing groups of guests talking about deals or telling stories. He imagined how many people in this hotel might be going through hardships, hidden behind polite smiles and well-pressed uniforms. After paying his tab, Bruce walked through the lobby, the sheen of marble floors reflecting the chandeliers overhead. He briefly thought about heading to the staff areas again, hoping to catch a glimpse of Elena, but decided against it. If he truly wanted to help, he needed to be more thoughtful about his approach. In the elevator up to his penthouse, he replayed Pamela's words in his mind, listening, caring, and creating opportunities. None of that came naturally to him in a personal sense. Sure, in business, he prided himself on strategic vision and problem-solving, but dealing with someone's real-life struggles required a different kind of empathy, one he wasn't sure he possessed anymore. As he entered his room, the silence greeted him once again. The suite overlooked the river, shimmering under the city lights. He removed his tie and tossed it on a nearby chair. Staring at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, he was struck by a simple truth. No matter how much he had achieved, there was still a part of him that felt incomplete. This was something money hadn't solved. The next morning, Bruce awoke to the soft light seeping through the curtains of his hotel suite. He had slept fitfully, drifting between unsettling dreams of eviction notices and board meetings. Still, he sprang out of bed with an unusual determination. He had a couple of hours before his next presentation, and he decided that, for once, he would step off his usual path. He skipped the lavish breakfast buffet in the main dining hall and instead made his way down to the staff cafeteria. The corridor leading there was utilitarian, with plain walls and a simple linoleum floor. He passed a few employees who eyed him curiously, recognizing the expensive suit and polished shoes as out of place in this realm of the hotel. He nodded politely, feeling both self-conscious and oddly resolute. Inside the cafeteria, the scent of scrambled eggs and coffee filled the air. Staff members chatted in hushed tones at small plastic tables. Bruce scanned the room until he spotted the person he was seeking, Elena hunched over a styrofoam cup of coffee, flipping through what looked like a stack of bills. Her hair was pinned back into a loose bun, and even from a distance, her fatigue was evident. He approached cautiously, mindful not to startle her. Clearing his throat, he said, "Excuse me, Elena?" She looked up, her eyes widening at the sight of him. He noticed the flicker of recognition, followed by wariness. "Yes?" she asked, setting down the cup. "May I sit?" Bruce asked, gesturing to the empty chair. Elena hesitated, then nodded. He settled into the seat, crossing his hands to keep them from fidgeting. Up close, he saw the dark circles under her eyes. She looked prepared to get up and leave at any moment. "I wanted to apologize for the other day," he said carefully. "I shouldn't have been in the restroom, obviously, and I'm sorry if I overheard anything personal." Elena straightened her posture. "It's fine," she replied, although her guarded tone told him otherwise. He knew he had to tread lightly. "Look, I realize we don't know each other, but I wanted to see if there was any way I could help." He paused, noticing how her jaw clenched slightly. "Not in a pitying sense," he clarified. I have resources, connections. If there's something that might make your life easier, maybe I can—" Before he could finish, she let out a soft, humorless laugh. "I've seen men like you before," she said, her voice tinted with both frustration and sadness. "Wealthy, well-meaning, but convinced that throwing money at a problem is the answer. I'm sure you think it's helpful, but you can't fix everything with a check." Bruce felt a stab of embarrassment. Part of him wanted to argue that he'd built his life on using his wealth as a tool for improvement. Another part recognized that Elena was right. He had no idea what it was like to be in her shoes now, as a single mother under threat of eviction. "I'm not trying to insult you," he said softly, "and I'm not assuming I can fix everything. I just couldn't stand by after hearing what you're going through." Elena regarded him for a long moment. "Why do you even care? I'm just someone who cleans rooms and serves drinks at your fancy conference." Her words carried a defensive edge, yet Bruce sensed the deeper question: could someone who had so much truly empathize with someone who had so little? He cleared his throat. "Because a long time ago, I was in a similar place. My mother and we struggled to pay rent and put food on the table. I promised myself I'd never go back to that life. But seeing you, it reminded me of how close I still am to who I used to be." She blinked, her expression softening slightly. "You? Really?" He nodded, feeling more vulnerable than he had in years. "Trust me, I haven't always worn expensive suits." They sat in silence for a beat, the steady hum of the cafeteria filling the void. Finally, Elena closed her eyes briefly, as if weighing whether to believe him. When she opened them, there was a flicker of something other than hostility, maybe curiosity or cautious respect. "Look," she began, "I appreciate the concern, but I have a daughter to think about, and I can't rely on handouts. I need stable work, decent pay, and—" She hesitated, as though she wanted to say more but held back. Bruce nodded, understanding more than she realized. "If you change your mind, or if there's any introduction I can make for you, let me know." He slid his business card across the table, the corners crisp against the plastic tabletop. "This is just in case." Eleanor stared at the card without picking it up. Bruce, sensing the conversation nearing its limit, stood. Before he left, he said, "I won't push, but I meant what I said." Then he turned and walked away, uncertain if he'd done the right thing or if he'd just cemented himself as another out-of-touch wealthy stranger. Outside the cafeteria, the hotel halls seemed brighter, bustling with activity. Bruce's phone buzzed with meeting reminders and texts, pulling him back into his corporate life. Yet he felt a shift within himself, an acknowledgement that, by stepping into Elena's world even for a moment, he had crossed a personal threshold. There was no telling what lay on the other side, but for the first time in years, he felt compelled to find out. Late the following afternoon, Bruce stepped away from the bustling conference schedule and found a quiet corner in the Riverside Hotel's lounge, his mind still caught between corporate demands and the lingering image of Eleanor's wary expression. His phone buzzed with reminders about upcoming investor meetings, but he ignored them for a moment, letting the chatter of nearby guests wash over him. That was when he heard a voice he hadn't expected to hear again so soon. "Bruce Ward," came a warm, confident tone. He turned to see Martha Sullivan approaching, his former economics professor from the University of Illinois, a key figure who once guided his youthful ambition. She was in her mid-60s, wearing a tailored jacket with a small pin that read, "Guest Speaker." A sense of relief coursed through him. Martha had always been someone he could trust. "Martha," Bruce stood, extending his hand. She clasped it in both of hers, giving him a fond smile. She'd barely changed, still exuding that purposeful energy he remembered from her lectures. "I saw your name on the roster and wanted to surprise you," she said, taking a seat across from him. "It's been, almost 20 years?" He settled back into his chair, nodding. "At least that. I didn't realize you still kept track of your old students." He allowed himself a faint smile. "But I'm glad you found me." Martha set her purse on her lap. "I keep track of the promising ones," she teased, scanning his face as though trying to read his current mood. "And I see Ward Enterprises is thriving, exactly as you once dreamed in my classroom." Bruce cleared his throat, his gaze wandering to the large window overlooking the cityscape. "It is," he said. "But success, sometimes it feels less fulfilling than I'd expected." She tilted her head, curiosity in her eyes. "Something on your mind, dear?" Bruce hesitated, weighing how much he wanted to disclose. Yet there was an unmistakable comfort in her presence. "You've always been straightforward, so I'll just say it. I recently crossed paths with someone who made me question the impact of what I do. A woman working multiple jobs to survive, raising a sick child. I remembered my own childhood struggles and realized that, in the process of climbing to the top, I might have lost sight of what really matters." Martha nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I always told you that money is a tool, not an identity. Does helping her go against some business objective of yours?" He glanced around, ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "It might complicate things, especially since everything in my world revolves around financial return. But after meeting her, I'm not sure I can keep ignoring the human cost of my decisions." She reached across the table and lightly patted his wrist. "Then don't ignore it," she said gently. "You're in a position to effect real change. But you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be. Are you willing to risk upsetting your shareholders, your routine, and maybe even your carefully crafted image?" Her words echoed truths he'd been unwilling to admit to himself. "I think I need to," he murmured, "for my own integrity, if nothing else." Martha smiled, a reassuring warmth in her eyes. "I know that young man who worked 2 jobs to put himself through college is still in there somewhere. Now, you just have to let him out." She paused, then added, "Perhaps you should start by understanding this woman's situation on her terms. Talk less, listen more. Let her teach you what she needs, rather than imposing your solutions." Bruce took a moment to absorb that suggestion. "It's not easy," he admitted. "I offered to help her financially, and she was offended. She doesn't want handouts." "Of course she doesn't," Martha responded without hesitation. "Would you in her place? Dignity is a strong force, Bruce. Find another way. Maybe an honest partnership or an opportunity that allows her to maintain pride in her work." He gave a slow nod, recalling Elena's resolute refusal of his money. "Right. I just don't know where to begin." "You'll figure it out," she said, standing up. "Now, I'm giving a presentation on social entrepreneurship in half an hour if you're interested. It might spark some ideas." Bruce rose with her, feeling more grounded than he had in days. "I'll be there," he said, meaning it. As Martha departed, a wave of gratitude swept over him. She had always had a way of inspiring him to think beyond profit margins. He checked his watch, knowing he had a business meeting soon, but her invitation felt more pressing. Resolved to find a new approach, he decided to skip another round of dry investor talks and instead head to Martha's session. Perhaps, amid her discussion on responsible leadership, he'd glean insights to help him navigate what was starting to feel like a personal moral crossroads. The next morning, Bruce woke before his alarm, a sign of the tension swirling in his mind. He left the comfort of his penthouse suite at the Riverside Hotel, bypassing the prepared conference breakfast he usually attended. Instead, he walked outside into the crisp Chicago air, dawn light brushing the glass and steel skyline in soft gold. He hadn't taken a genuine break from his meticulously planned schedule in years, maybe ever. This time, he cancelled a morning roundtable discussion and grabbed a taxi, headed toward the neighborhood where he'd grown up. It wasn't far from downtown, but the differences were stark. Older buildings with chipped paint, narrow streets lined with vehicles that had seen better days, and small businesses struggling to stay open. He asked the driver to drop him at a familiar corner store. Stepping onto the sidewalk, he felt an odd rush of nostalgia. The mural on the brick wall, once vibrant, was now faded, depicting scenes of Chicago's past. As he strolled down the block, he recognized the rundown apartment building where he'd spent much of his childhood. A woman sat on the stoop, reading a newspaper. She glanced at him politely, but with mild curiosity. No one in a tailored coat usually walked this way just for a stroll. Bruce didn't intend to strike up conversation, but the memory of Elena's struggles kept surfacing. He spotted a nearby community center that had been built years after he left. The sign out front announced free classes, job fairs, and counseling services. On impulse, he went inside. The reception area was simple, staffed by 2 volunteers sorting pamphlets. "May I help you?" asked a middle-aged man with kind eyes. Bruce hesitated, unsure what he was looking for. "I used to live around here," he said, feeling a bit self-conscious. "I was just wondering what kind of programs you offer now." The man smiled. "We have after-school care, we help with resumes, and we work with local businesses to secure job placements. It's all donation-funded. Are you interested in volunteering, or—" Bruce realized he was staring at a notice board filled with colorful flyers, each detailing a different community need: fundraising for medical bills, support groups for single parents, youth mentoring. His thoughts flicked back to Elena, imagining what a resource like this might mean to someone in her position. "I might be," he said slowly. "Or maybe my company could help sponsor something." The volunteer handed him a brochure. "We rely on corporate sponsorships for a lot of what we do. Let me know if you'd like to talk to our director." He thanked the volunteer, scanning the brochure briefly. The place was doing tangible good in a neighborhood he once called home, a far cry from the high-rise boardrooms he frequented. It felt like a reminder that bridging the gap between wealth and need was possible if someone chose to care. Returning to the sidewalk, Bruce felt an urge to simplify the day's routine, like he owed it to his past and to the people he'd once known. Normally, he would rush back to an afternoon full of emails and Zoom calls. Instead, he wandered a few more blocks, glimpsing graffiti messages that alternated between expressions of hope and anger. He paused by a local diner with a handwritten sign offering homemade specials for just a few dollars. His phone chimed, snapping him out of this reflective haze. It was Timothy Brooks, who sounded irritated on voicemail. "Bruce, the investors from Toronto arrived early, and they're asking where you are. Please call me back immediately." Part of Bruce wanted to drop everything and hurry back to the polished conference rooms. but that would mean returning to the same unyielding cycle. He stared at the diner's door, remembering what Martha had said about making a conscious choice to change. This small act, skipping a meeting to reconnect with a world outside his corporate bubble, felt like a final break from the routine that had defined him. With a sigh, he dialed Timothy. "Tim," he began, "reschedule them for later today or tomorrow. I have something personal to attend to." His CFO sputtered in protest. "Personal? Bruce, this is not like you. They'll be furious." "I understand," Bruce cut in, voice calm but firm. "Tell them I'll meet them tonight if necessary, but I'm not available right now." He ended the call without waiting for more arguments. The sidewalk was quiet, a light breeze lifting the corners of the brochures he still clutched in his hand. It felt as though, in choosing this moment over his usual obligations, he had finally taken a tangible step past his comfort zone. He wasn't entirely sure where this would lead, but he knew he couldn't keep turning a blind eye to the realities he'd once lived, and the plight people like Elena still faced every day. Back at the Riverside Hotel in the late afternoon, Bruce navigated past the lavish lobby and found himself in the service corridors once more. This time, he moved with more purpose, greeting staff members as he passed them, trying to remember names. Some recognized him from the conference, others were simply polite, but everyone seemed mildly surprised that the high-profile CEO was walking around the behind-the-scenes areas. He eventually made his way to a large, brightly lit basement room, an employee lounge that few guests ever saw. Several rows of lockers lined one wall, and round tables dotted the center, each holding a few chairs where workers took their breaks. Someone had taped motivational posters to the walls, along with a notice board covered in shift schedules and hand-drawn birthday greetings. The air smelled faintly of floor polish and microwave food, a stark contrast to the scented candles and fine upholstery upstairs. Bruce had decided that if he truly wanted to understand Elena's world, he needed to see more of where she spent her time. Yet now that he stood there, he felt a bit like an intruder. A young woman, Linda Parker, who worked as a housekeeper, noticed him first. She gave him a hesitant smile. "Mr. Ward, right? You're down here?" He nodded. "Bruce is fine," he said, trying to sound approachable. "I wanted to, take a look at the facilities, see how things are going for the staff." He cleared his throat, realizing it sounded like an inspection. Linda raised an eyebrow, but then gave a small shrug. "It's decent, I guess. Could use some improvements, like better chairs or an updated break area. It's not exactly top priority for management, so we make do." Bruce glanced at the worn-out chairs and flickering overhead lights. "I see." A wave of guilt passed through him. He'd never even considered where the hotel's employees relaxed or stored their belongings. It was all part of a hidden infrastructure that he seldom bothered to think about. He noticed Jason Miller, a short-order cook he'd briefly seen in the cafeteria, leaning against a locker. The man looked up from tying his apron. "Oh, hey," he said. "Need a snack from the kitchen, boss?" Bruce shook his head, giving a slight smile. "Not right now, but thanks. Actually, I was hoping to find Elena Ramirez. She works cleaning night shifts sometimes, right?" Jason wiped his hands on his apron. "Yeah, Elena's usually here late afternoon until after midnight, depending on her schedule. She might be in the supply room getting cleaning carts set up." "Why?" Bruce hesitated, unsure how much to share. "I wanted to ask her something, work-related," he fibbed, then added more sincerely, "She helped me out the other day, and I owe her a conversation." Linda and Jason exchanged glances. "Just be good to her," Linda said quietly. "Elena's a tough cookie, but she's had it rough. She's proud, though. Doesn't like pity." "I understand," Bruce replied. "I only hope to talk, not to cause any trouble. He followed Jason's directions to a separate corridor, passing tall metal shelves stacked with linens, soap dispensers, and other housekeeping supplies. The hallway was cooler, lit by a harsh fluorescent light. The hum of an industrial air system echoed through the space. He turned a corner and almost bumped right into Elena, who was pushing a cart loaded with cleaning fluids and fresh towels. She startled, dropping a rolled-up bundle of linens. Bruce instinctively bent to pick them up. "Sorry," he said, handing them back to her. "I didn't mean to scare you." She looked him up and down, suspicion flaring in her brown eyes. "What are you doing here?" He paused, realizing how odd it must seem for a multimillionaire CEO to be skulking around the supply rooms. "I wanted to see how things operate backstage," he said softly. Well, I was hoping we could talk again. Maybe not about money, just talk." Eleanor let out a slow breath, setting the bundle on top of the cart. "I have a lot of work, Mr. Ward. I need to finish this shift. I've got no time for chit-chat." He saw the tightness in her expression, as if she was bracing for another lecture or an unsolicited offer of help. "I understand you're busy," he said. "Maybe I could walk with you while you get your tasks done." "I won't get in your way." She studied him, clearly unsure whether to accept his presence. After a tense few seconds, she gave a reluctant nod. "Fine, but I'm telling you, I don't have time to stand around." Bruce nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. As they walked, he glanced at the chipped paint on the walls, the squeaky wheels on her cart, the battered bin that held the cleaning cloths. Everything here seemed to stand in direct contrast to the glossy, pristine image that greeted hotel guests upstairs. It was a new environment, unpolished and far more real. And for the first time, Bruce felt like he was learning about an entire realm of the hotel that he'd never bothered to see before. Elena moved methodically through the corridors, replacing toiletries in the guest rooms slated for cleaning that afternoon. Though reluctant, she tolerated Bruce's company, occasionally pointing out small issues like malfunctioning vacuum cleaners or a leaky housekeeping closet sink that management seemed too busy to fix. He listened intently, watching her work with a quiet efficiency. They entered a vacant guest suite that smelled faintly of stale cologne. The occupant had checked out earlier in the day, leaving behind a few crumpled tissues and an unmade bed. Bruce stood by the entrance as Elena began stripping the linens. He felt odd just standing there, so he cleared his throat. "Need a hand?" She paused, glancing at him as though he were speaking a foreign language. "Do you even know how to make a bed without 300 thread count sheets?" He managed a light chuckle, recognizing the jab. "I can learn," he offered, "not saying I'll do it well, but I'll try." She handed him a corner of the fitted sheet. "Start by tucking this around the mattress, like this." She demonstrated, and he mimicked her. It took him a few tries to get it right, fumbling with the stiff edges. Elena moved swiftly, finishing her side in half the time it took him. After the bedding was arranged, she replaced the towels in the bathroom. Bruce hovered in the doorway, uncertain of what else he could do. "I could empty the trash," he suggested, spotting a small bin by the desk. She shrugged. "Knock yourself out." As he did so, she couldn't hide a tiny smirk. "You realize you could be in a boardroom right now, making thousands of dollars a minute instead of doing housekeeping chores with me?" He set the bin down, taking a moment to think. "Yes," he admitted, "and that's exactly why this matters. I need to see firsthand what goes on here. Too often, I'm insulated by my position." She studied him in silence for a moment, then returned to adjusting the pillows. "So what exactly do you plan to do, Mr. Corporate?" He leaned against the doorframe, sensing a chance to open up. "I'd like to use my resources in a way that genuinely helps the staff, maybe better equipment, better healthcare benefits, or ensuring wages match the cost of living in Chicago. But I don't want to roll in with a check and assume I know what's best. That's what I'm trying to learn. Her expression softened just a little, though skepticism remained. It's not only about higher wages. People need a schedule that allows them to take care of their kids, or maybe some assistance with transportation. You know how many employees commute from the suburbs because they can't afford rent in the city. That's time away from family. He nodded, feeling a growing admiration for her insight. I never realized the full scope, he admitted. I was too focused on expansion and margins to notice the human element, but times change, and I guess I can too. She gave a thoughtful hum, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. Change is hard. I've learned that firsthand. You lose people, you lose stability, you lose dreams you once had. She paused, clearing her throat as if stopping herself from getting too personal. But if someone's really determined, maybe they can adapt. They finished tidying up, and Elena glanced around the room with a practiced eye. Satisfied, she grabbed the cleaning cart. Bruce followed her back into the hallway, noticing how the hotel corridor smelled faintly of fresh linen and industrial disinfectant. Each door they passed led to a different set of lives. Guests who came and went, rarely thinking about the people who cleaned up after them. After restocking her cart at a supply closet, Eleanor took out her phone to check messages. A brief flash of worry crossed her face, and she typed a quick reply. Bruce recognized her distress. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. She slipped the phone into her pocket. "My daughter's doctor," she said. "They need to run more tests." Nothing new, just piling up medical bills. Bruce wanted to offer reassurance but feared sounding trite. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, and then hesitated. "If you need any contacts in the medical field, I might be able to help." She pursed her lips. "I'll consider it," she answered, which was more than she'd given him before. Then she started pushing the cart forward again. He followed, noticing the slight slump in her shoulders. Her world was not simply a basement lounge or a housekeeping cart. It was carrying the weight of a child's health, overdue rent, and a job that offered little security. As they turned the corner to the next suite, Bruce realized that in a single afternoon, he'd learned more about the realities of hotel staff life than he had in years of owning properties. While it was uncomfortable and even humbling, he felt it was a necessary step. After all, if he really intended to change, this was how it began, by understanding the people his business affected, one cart of linens at a time. An hour later, Elena guided her cleaning cart back into the employee lounge. She'd completed the bulk of her assigned rooms, and it was time for a quick break. Bruce trailed behind, uncertain whether he was welcome, but determined to keep learning. In the lounge, a few employees sat around one of the tables, eating late lunches. The atmosphere was markedly different from the hushed politeness of the lobby or the corporate hustle of the conference floors. Linda Parker waved them over. "Elena, over here. I saved you a seat," she said, nodding in acknowledgement of Bruce. "Mr. Ward, you can join us if you like." Feeling a little awkward, Bruce took the offer. Elena sat down, letting out a long breath. She looked around for a moment, then asked Jason Miller, who was peeling an orange, "Any news from HR about those extra shifts you requested?" He shook his head. "No luck yet. They're not cutting hours, but they're not adding more either." He eyed Bruce warily. "Not sure if that's going to change now that the boss is here." Before Bruce could respond, Linda spoke up. "Look, we all know the hotel is profitable. Maybe not all of us need extra hours, but a lot of us could use more predictable schedules or even a small raise, at least to match the cost of living." She glanced at Elena. "Or better healthcare. That would help people with families." The group fell quiet, Each of them gauging Bruce's reaction. He met their gazes, feeling both the weight of their unspoken hopes and the skepticism that he might simply be another executive delivering hollow promises. "I hear you," he said evenly, "and I'm looking into ways to improve staff conditions. It's not just about what's on paper, but how it affects your daily lives." Linda gave a cautious nod. "Guess we'll believe it when we see it." Elena leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. Sometimes, a small change can mean a lot, especially for those of us juggling multiple obligations, but it's got to be real, and it can't happen overnight. Bruce appreciated her honesty. He realized that, unlike in corporate environments where deals were sealed with a handshake, trust here needed to be earned through tangible results. "Fair enough," he said. "For now, I want to understand what would help the most." Jason finished peeling his orange and handed a slice to Linda. "You want a real solution? Talk to corporate about investing in a staff development program. Maybe help folks move up if they want to. Some of us have bigger dreams than cleaning rooms or cooking the same meals every day." That struck a chord with Bruce. "Career paths," he mused. "Ward Enterprises could create a training program to help employees transition to administrative roles, event planning, or even management if they choose, especially for people who show initiative." Eleanor locked eyes with him, a question lurking there. "Would you really let a housekeeper or a line cook become a manager if they earned it?" Bruce's voice was firm. "If they prove themselves, why not? My company should recognize hard work and talent regardless of a person's starting point." A thoughtful silence followed. Finally, Linda said, "Well, if that ever happens, I'd be the first to sign up." Sensing the tension ease, Bruce allowed himself a hint of optimism. "Let's just say it's something I'll bring up at our next executive meeting. I can't promise immediate miracles, but I can promise I'll try." Jason snorted a laugh. "We'll hold you to that, boss." Conversation drifted to lighter topics. Favorite local restaurants, the odd requests hotel guests sometimes made. Elena shared a quick story about a celebrity who insisted the curtains be drawn at all times, even at night, as though the paparazzi might appear. Bruce listened, amused, and realized these small stories humanized the people who toiled in the background of his business ventures. After a while, Elena rose, collecting her things. "Break's over," she announced. "I have another floor to check before my shift ends, and then I'm off to my second job." She gave Bruce a nod. "Thanks for stopping by." He stood as well, feeling a curious mixture of humility and renewed purpose. "Thank you for letting me crash your break," he said, addressing all of them. "If there's anything else you think I should see, let me know." The group broke up, each returning to their tasks. Bruce lingered for a second, letting the moment settle in. It had been more than just lunch table chatter. In that short span, he'd formed the beginnings of alliances with the staff, people who, up until now, existed only as line items on a payroll. For the first time, he sensed a foundation on which real change might be built. Later that evening, Bruce found himself back on the executive floor of the Riverside Hotel, facing a very different crowd. Timothy Brooks was waiting in the hallway outside a private meeting room, arms folded and posture tense. He sighed in relief when he saw Bruce emerge from the elevator. "Finally," Timothy muttered. "We've kept the Toronto investors waiting." "They're not happy." Bruce glanced at his watch, realizing he was indeed running behind. "Let's get this over with," he said, bracing himself. He stepped inside, where three sharply dressed individuals with matching stern expressions were seated around a polished table. They barely acknowledged his arrival, annoyance evident in their demeanor. Mr. Ward, one of them, a woman named Victoria Reynolds, spoke first. "We've been waiting. Are we ready to discuss the site acquisition in
Of course, Bruce said, taking a seat at the head of the table,
Timothy joined him, quickly distributing packets of documents. "My apologies for the delay. Let's proceed." They dove into complex details about property values, projected returns, and the cost of developing an upscale commercial center. Ordinarily, Bruce would have led the conversation with his usual assertiveness, but his mind wandered briefly to that staff lounge, to Elena and her colleagues who lived paycheck to paycheck. He found himself pausing more than usual, considering the human implications behind each set of numbers. Victoria raised an eyebrow at one point. "Bruce, you look distracted. Are you still in favor of pushing for maximum profit margins on this project?" Timothy threw a subtle warning glance at Bruce. "We're absolutely committed to profitability," Timothy chimed in, trying to cover. Bruce glanced at the data in front of him. "Yes, profitability is important," he said carefully. "But we might need to factor in some community-related costs to ensure that we're not displacing local residents without options." He flipped a page, noticing a section about rezoning that could force lower-income tenants out of adjacent areas. Victoria pursed her lips, exchanging a quick look with her associates. "Are you suggesting we allocate budget to relocations or community outreach? That would reduce the return on investment," Bruce inhaled, feeling the weight of the group's disapproval. "In the long run, socially responsible developments can strengthen local economies and lead to stable, long-term gains. It's worth considering." One of the other investors, a man named Ian Caldwell, spoke up. "That's all well and good for PR, but we're looking at short-term returns here. The market is volatile, and we need to maximize immediate profit to keep shareholders satisfied." Bruce noticed Timothy fidgeting, clearly aware of the tightrope Bruce was walking. A wave of discomfort passed through Bruce, but he recalled his recent conversations with Martha, Elena, and the hotel staff. "I'm not ignoring shareholder interests," he replied calmly. "But the days of maximizing profit at any human cost might need rethinking. A balanced approach could yield benefits beyond just the bottom line." A tense silence filled the room. Timothy cleared his throat. "What Bruce means is, we'll explore a social strategy that could enhance our brand, leading to higher goodwill. That might offset the costs." The Toronto group did not look convinced. Victoria tapped a manicured nail on the table. "We'll need to see detailed analyses on that. If the cost gets too high, it won't be acceptable to our partners." Bruce nodded. "I understand. I'll have the research team prepare a thorough proposal." After another hour of guarded discussion, the meeting wrapped up. As the investors left, they exchanged looks that suggested they felt uneasy about Bruce's change in tone. Timothy waited until the door closed behind them, then turned to Bruce. "What was that about?" "You're usually the one pushing for the most aggressive expansion." Bruce sank back in his chair. "People's lives are on the line when we move into certain areas. I can't just pretend that doesn't matter anymore." Timothy ran a hand over his mouth, clearly trying to decide whether to argue. "You're the CEO, Bruce, but I hope you realize that shifting priorities like this will cause turmoil among investors, maybe even the board." A flicker of defiance rose in Bruce. "Then so be it," he said quietly. "I'll find a way to show them that a more responsible approach can be profitable." Timothy sighed. "I just hope you know what you're doing. This is a risk I didn't see coming." Bruce stood, gathering his papers. "Neither did I," he admitted, "but sometimes, to do what's right, we have to take risks." Timothy nodded slowly, though his concern was evident. Bruce left the room, feeling a churn of mixed emotions, resolve, trepidation, and a strange sense of possibility. He recognized that he had just confronted the first real obstacle in this new path, navigating the clash between profit-driven partners and his emerging conscience. The question now was whether he could balance both worlds without tearing himself and his company apart. Bruce paced his penthouse suite, phone in hand, feeling the dull throb of a tension headache. Outside his window, Chicago's lights glimmered against the evening sky. He was due at Ward Enterprises headquarters the next morning for a critical meeting about the company's new social initiatives, a meeting he had insisted on, despite the skepticism of his executive team. It had been several days since the tense conversation with the Toronto investors, and his resolve to find a more humane approach to business had only solidified. He scrolled through a series of emails from Timothy Brooks, who had compiled staff feedback from the Riverside Hotel. Issues ranged from unpredictable scheduling to outdated equipment and minimal benefits. As Bruce skimmed them, he realized how each small complaint represented a very real burden for employees. In the past, he might have delegated such minor concerns to a lower-level manager. Now they felt personal, fueling his determination to make tangible improvements. Early the next day, he arrived at Ward Enterprises headquarters, a modern glass and steel tower that stood as a symbol of his success. He took the elevator to the top floor, where his corner office boasted sweeping views of the city. Timothy was waiting for him, a thick folder clutched in his arms. "I've gathered the data you wanted," he said, voice tinged with caution. "We're expecting a few board members to join by video conference." Bruce nodded. "Good. Let's get started." Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was cool and professional. Martha Sullivan, his old mentor, had agreed to attend as a guest advisor, which made him feel less isolated. She offered him a welcoming nod. One by one, Bruce laid out proposals that ranged from creating a staff development fund to adjusting wages in certain roles. He also suggested a pilot program to help employees cover urgent medical expenses. A few of the board members, especially long-time associates, looked intrigued, even supportive. However, others, including some dialed in from different cities, questioned the financial viability. Cutting into margins for staff development, that could damage our quarterly performance, came the voice of Richard Nolan, a major shareholder who never hid his disdain for anything that might reduce profits. "We're already hearing chatter from some investors who aren't pleased with your new direction." Bruce's chest tightened, but he stood firm. "I believe employees are our backbone. If they have better conditions, they'll be more productive, morale will improve, and long-term retention will save us money on turnover. This isn't just altruism, it's strategic." Nolan scoffed. "There's a difference between treating staff well and bleeding money on social experiments. We should be expanding aggressively in new markets, not funding daycare for employees." Martha cleared her throat politely. "Having studied market trends, I can assure you that modern corporations benefit from social responsibility. Even if it doesn't show up as an immediate spike in profits, it cultivates a more resilient brand. We're not talking about frivolous spending. We're talking about investing in people." Tension bristled in the room. Despite some pushback, Bruce managed to secure a provisional agreement to start small, beginning with a pilot program at the Riverside Hotel. They would re-evaluate the data after 6 months. It wasn't everything he'd hoped, but it was a step forward. As the meeting ended, Timothy stopped Bruce in the hallway. "You handled that better than I expected." Nolan's furious, but at least he didn't outright veto the plan. Bruce exhaled slowly, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "I have a feeling he's going to watch me like a hawk, hoping I slip up." Timothy gave a tight nod. "Probably, but you got your foot in the door. That's more than I thought possible." Feeling a mix of relief and apprehension, Bruce returned to his office, where Martha was waiting. She set down her purse and gave him a thoughtful look. "So, how do you plan to implement these programs effectively? The board's demands for measurable results won't vanish." He placed a hand on his desk, the polished wood cool under his fingertips. "I'll need allies among the staff, people like Elena, Jason, Linda, individuals who can tell me what's actually needed. Then I'll gather tangible data on improved morale, lower turnover, maybe even better guest reviews. It has to be concrete if I'm to convince people like Nolan. Martha offered him a faint smile. It's a big undertaking, but you're off to a genuine start. Just remember that transformation doesn't happen overnight. He nodded, recalling how the Riverside Hotel staff had kindly begun trusting him, at least enough to share concerns. This was indeed a series of tests, ones that could either strengthen his convictions or break them. For the first time in a while, Bruce felt prepared to take on the challenge, convinced that small victories would pave the way for meaningful change. Later that week, Bruce found himself pulled in two opposite directions. On one side, he was heavily involved in drafting the pilot program for the Riverside Hotel employees. On the other, the expansion project in Seattle was moving forward rapidly, prompting daily calls from investors who insisted on maximizing profits. He spent his mornings in internal meetings discussing improved benefits for workers, and his afternoons arguing with stakeholders who saw no value in such frills. After a grueling day, he sat in his executive chair, gazing at the city skyline. A thick dossier lay open on his desk, details about the Seattle plan, including property acquisitions that might force out residents from older, affordable apartments nearby. The real estate developers hired by Ward Enterprises argued that displacement was collateral damage for growth. Bruce felt increasingly uneasy with that term. He was deep in thought when his phone buzzed. Elena's name appeared on the screen. She'd only called him once before to let him know she could meet with the pilot program coordinator. Concern prickled through him as he pressed the answer button. "Eleanor? Everything all right?" Her voice came through shaky but determined. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I'm at the hospital with my daughter. She's having complications, and I don't know who else to call right now." Bruce's heart clenched. "No, it's fine. What do you need?" She hesitated, likely struggling with her own pride. "I could use some advice, or maybe a reference. They're talking about running expensive tests, and I'm not sure how to navigate the insurance paperwork. You said you might know some people." "Text me the hospital details," he said gently. "I'll be right there." Within an hour, Bruce entered the muted fluorescent corridors of St. Mark's Hospital. He spotted Elena in the waiting area, her dark curls falling over tired eyes. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, looking worlds away from the calm composure she tried to maintain at work. "How is she?" Bruce asked, voice soft. He noticed the stack of papers in her lap. Medical forms, bills, insurance documents. Elena sighed. "Stable for now. They need more tests, but the insurance company is balking. They say it's not fully covered. I can't afford it if it's out of pocket." Bruce took a seat beside her, scanning the papers. "Let me see if I can call someone who knows these processes better. I have a contact at a health advocacy group in the city." She watched him carefully as he dialed, speaking to someone named Jeannie, who specialized in resolving medical insurance disputes. After a brief conversation, he handed the phone to Elena, urging her to explain the situation in detail. As she talked, Bruce stepped away to let her have some privacy, though he could still see the tension in her posture. When she ended the call, her eyes were damp. "They said they can help me file the claim properly and maybe get a waiver. Thank you for that." He placed a hand on the back of his neck, feeling an odd mixture of relief and guilt. "I'm just glad I could do something." She looked away, voice wavering. "I hate asking for help. I'm supposed to figure this out on my own." He lowered himself into the chair across from her. "Everyone needs help sometimes. I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't gotten breaks along the way. It's not a weakness to accept that." Elena nodded, wiping a stray tear. "I keep thinking I can work more hours, make enough to handle things. But my daughter's condition isn't the kind that just goes away." For a moment, Bruce flashed back to the nights he'd spent pacing a cramped living room as a boy, listening to his mother worry about how they'd buy groceries. He wanted to tell Elena that money alone wouldn't fix everything, but it could fix some things. "Look," he said, choosing his words, "I can't pretend to know exactly what you're going through. But if you need something, time off, help with medical forms, let me or the new pilot program coordinator know. That's why we're setting it up." She inhaled sharply, as though about to protest, but then nodded. "I'll think about it. My schedule's crazy, but I might need a more flexible arrangement if her treatment gets more intense." They sat in tense silence for a few beats, the beeping of hospital machines echoing down the hallway. Eventually, a nurse stepped out to update Elena that her daughter was stable but would need an overnight observation. Elena rose, forcing a grateful smile in Bruce's direction. "Thank you again," she whispered. "I'll keep you posted." He nodded, feeling a wave of empathy and protectiveness he hadn't experienced in a long time. As he watched her walk back toward her daughter's room, he thought about the expansion in Seattle again, about the families who might be forced into similar uncertainties. He was starting to see a clearer moral crossroad. Continuing business as usual would mean enabling a cycle he now found deeply unsettling. But changing course would require standing up to powerful interests, and he wasn't entirely sure if his convictions alone would be enough to see it through. The following week brought an onslaught of complications. First, Bruce discovered that part of the pilot program funding had been unexpectedly reallocated by an overzealous accounting department trying to patch a budget shortfall elsewhere. Then came news from Timothy Brooks that another major investor was questioning Bruce's commitment to unnecessary expenditures for employee development. Adding to the chaos, a city council member leaked information suggesting that Ward Enterprises' Seattle project would displace hundreds of tenants unless new terms were negotiated. Headlines accused the company of hypocrisy, promising better treatment for its workers while ignoring the plight of entire neighborhoods. Bruce, scanning these articles on his laptop, felt his stomach churn. That afternoon, he called a meeting with several department heads to address these crises. They gathered in a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. Timothy arrived with a stress pinched across his forehead. The other executives seemed wary, sensing the tension. "All right," Bruce began, voice steady. "We have a few fires to put out. First, the Riverside Hotel pilot program is missing funds. I want them reinstated immediately. Second, we need to re-examine the Seattle expansion plans to ensure we're not destroying communities. I'm prepared to meet with local housing advocates if that's what it takes." One department head, a woman named Felicia Grant, pursed her lips. "Bruce, these are admirable goals, but the real estate team has already locked in our construction schedules and loan agreements. Any delay could cost millions." He nodded gravely. "I'm aware, but ignoring the situation will cost us in reputation and integrity, maybe more in the long run. We've seen how negative press can sink a project. We need a plan that supports the community as well as the company." Timothy cleared his throat. "I'm working on the pilot program funds. We should have the missing portion reinstated by next quarter. But as for Seattle, the board is pushing back. They don't see the point of negotiating with community groups." A wave of frustration washed over Bruce. "Then we'll help them see it. Because if we don't handle this properly, it won't just be the pilot program at risk, it'll be Ward Enterprises' entire reputation." After the meeting, executives filtered out, some looking overwhelmed, others intrigued. Bruce stayed behind, gazing through the glass walls at the cityscape. He recognized that this moment felt bigger than any deal he'd ever brokered. The mounting obstacles threatened not just his new initiatives, but the very direction of his company. Later that evening, as he walked into the Riverside Hotel's staff lounge to check on the pilot program's progress, he found Elena, Linda, and Jason poring over documents alongside the pilot program coordinator, Kayla Sampson. Kayla, a no-nonsense professional with experience in human resources, waved Bruce over to their table. "We could use your input," she said, pointing to a stack of forms. Eleanor looked up, shadows under her eyes revealing her exhaustion. "We've got employees who want in on the new benefits, but half of them aren't sure they can meet the requirements, like the hours needed or the eligibility timelines. Some have second jobs." Jason tapped a table with his pen. "Also, we need a clear channel for them to submit claims. Right now, it's complicated." Bruce pulled up a chair, scanning the forms. "We'll simplify the eligibility. I'll talk to HR about it." "What else is missing?" Linda hesitated, then spoke softly. "There's anxiety about whether this program is just for show. People think it might vanish once the conference is over, or when you move on to other priorities." Bruce felt a pang. "It's not for show," he said, locking eyes with her. "I want this to work, but we're facing resistance from the higher-ups." He sighed, deciding to be candid. "I'm not going to let them shut it down, though." Elena's posture softened slightly. "Thank you, we just hope it's not a temporary bandage." He nodded, acknowledging their doubts. "I have my own battles to fight, but I'm determined." Over the next hour, they hashed out practical steps, adjusting schedules, clarifying forms, and ensuring staff could find assistance without jumping through excessive hoops. Though the tension was tangible, there was also a flicker of optimism. The group parted ways with a plan to implement these changes immediately. But as Bruce headed out, he caught a glimpse of a news alert on his phone. Ward Enterprises under fire for potential mass evictions in Seattle. The pit in his stomach returned. Even if he won the staff's trust here, a much bigger confrontation loomed. He realized there would likely be a point where compromise would no longer be possible, and he might have to choose between corporate expansion and his evolving conscience. A mountain of an obstacle he wasn't sure he could climb alone. 2 weeks of concerted effort bore their first real fruit. Kayla Sampson worked tirelessly to iron out kinks in the pilot program. Word spread among the Riverside Hotel staff that healthcare assistance was now simpler to apply for, and that scheduling could be more flexible for those juggling family obligations. A few employees, including Eleanor, reported feeling cautiously optimistic about the changes. Bruce monitored progress through daily updates Kayla sent. Each small success felt like a personal triumph: an employee who finally got medication covered, or a parent able to rearrange shifts to care for a child. He knew it was only a fraction of what needed to be done, but for once he saw tangible results that aligned with his values. Yet amidst these modest victories, tensions continued to simmer at the higher levels of Ward Enterprises. Shareholders were growing restless over what they perceived as unnecessary complications. Timothy Brooks discreetly warned Bruce that Richard Nolan and some other board members were looking for ways to push him out if returns didn't meet forecasts. One afternoon, Bruce received an unexpected call from Nicole, his ex-wife. They rarely spoke, and the sound of her voice immediately put him on edge. "Bruce, I heard rumors about you butting heads with your board." "Are you all right?" He frowned, wondering how news had traveled so fast. "I'm dealing with it," he said, tone measured. She paused. "I ran into your mother recently. She worries about you. This new direction, she's proud you're helping people, but she also fears you might lose everything you worked for." Her concern took him by surprise, stirring a complex mix of gratitude and frustration. "I appreciate the heads up, Nicole. But I'm not turning back now." That evening, he decided to check on Elena and her daughter. He learned from Kayla that Elena had taken a couple of days off for her child's follow-up tests. Instead of calling, he drove to the modest apartment complex on the city's south side, where Elena lived. The place was old, with chipped paint and a half-lit sign. He parked in a visitor's slot, feeling slightly uneasy as he climbed the dimly lit stairwell. He found her door, apartment 3C, answered by a neighbor who was just leaving. The neighbor recognized Bruce from the hotel. Elena's inside. She might be sleeping, though. It's been a rough week for her. Bruce nodded, knocking lightly. Elena opened the door, surprise in her eyes. She looked worn, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a simple cardigan over jeans. "Bruce, what are you doing here?" He cleared his throat. "I wanted to see how your daughter's doing. And to make sure you're okay." He held up a small takeout bag. "I brought some soup, probably not as good as homemade, but it's warm." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was small, the furniture sparse but tidy. Children's drawings decorated one wall, bright colors on crinkled paper. A faint hum of a TV came from a back room, and Bruce guessed that was her daughter's space. "Thank you," Eleanor said, accepting the bag. She guided him to a couch that had seen better days. "I wasn't sure if anyone from work would come by, didn't even tell many people where I live." He sat carefully, noticing how every surface seemed to hold some practical necessity. Medical brochures, unopened bills, a few worn books. "I know this is outside the usual employee-boss relationship," he began, "but after everything, I figured showing up in person was more genuine than a phone call." She nodded, warming the soup in a small microwave. When it was ready, she placed it on the coffee table. "My daughter's resting. The doctors say the tests might lead to new treatment options, so there's hope." He offered a small smile. "I'm relieved to hear that." She sank into an armchair, exhaling deeply. "Listen, I really do appreciate what you've done. The pilot program, the insurance help, it's made a difference." "I'm glad," he said, a swirl of humility and relief coursing through him. "But it's just a start. There's still a lot I need to fix at the hotel and across my company." Elena looked down at her hands. "I heard rumors that some people in your boardroom aren't happy about what you're doing. That true?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yes. They'd rather focus on expansion, no matter the cost. I'm pushing back, but it's not easy." She studied his face, her voice gentler than usual. "Well, for what it's worth, you shouldn't give up. Even small wins matter to people like me. It shows us somebody is willing to fight for us." His chest tightened with a rush of emotion. "Thank you, Eleanor." They spoke a while longer about her daughter's condition, about the changes at the hotel. Although the situation was far from perfect, Bruce felt that for the first time, he wasn't just a figurehead making hollow promises. He'd earned a sliver of trust. As he left, a quiet sense of accomplishment enveloped him. The pilot program was holding. Employees were cautiously hopeful, and Elena's gratitude was real. Yet he couldn't ignore the ominous rumblings from the board. His victory here felt fragile, like a delicate balancing act that could crumble if he didn't remain vigilant. In the days that followed, Bruce poured his energy into fortifying the pilot program. He also organized a small group to visit Seattle, hoping to negotiate with local community leaders about the looming displacement issue. Despite these efforts, internal dissent at Ward Enterprises continued to build. Some shareholders were openly questioning his judgment, whispering that maybe he was too soft to lead the company any longer. One morning, Martha Sullivan invited Bruce for coffee at a quiet cafe near the university campus where she still occasionally lectured. He arrived early, scanning the cozy interior of warm brick walls and mismatched chairs. She soon joined him, ordering a cup of tea and regarding him with her calm, perceptive gaze. "I see the stress etched on your face, Bruce," she began gently. "Tell me how you're truly doing." He leaned forward, elbows on the small wooden table. "I'm at a crossroads. The pilot program is working, albeit slowly, but I'm fighting a war on the corporate front, and the Seattle expansion is a major flashpoint. Investors want to bulldoze through any opposition. The community is threatening lawsuits, and I'm caught in the middle." Martha stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Have you considered scaling back the Seattle project until a fair relocation plan is in place?" He let out a sigh. "That's precisely what I want. To incorporate relocation funds or maybe partner with local housing groups. But every time I bring it up, the board sees it as a threat to our bottom line." She pressed her lips together. "You might need to prepare for the worst-case scenario, losing some of your power in the company if they mobilize against you. Are you ready to risk that?" His gaze dropped to the table. "It scares me. I've worked my whole life to get here, but when I think of Eleanor, her daughter, and countless families that might be impacted in Seattle, I know I can't keep doing business the old way." Martha nodded, a mixture of pride and worry in her expression. "Then gather your allies, prove that ethical choices yield longer-term benefits, show them financial models, success stories from other companies. You're a strategist, Bruce. Use those skills for this cause." He appreciated her unwavering support. "I'll do exactly that," he said, deciding to host a special session at Ward Enterprises to present new data on responsible development. He hoped the numbers would sway fence-sitters on the board. A couple of days later, Bruce found himself back in the Riverside Hotel staff lounge, observing Kayla Sampson train a small group of employees on how to file for new benefits. Elena was there, but with tired eyes, still balancing her daughter's treatment schedule. Linda Parker raised her hand, asking about potential childcare vouchers. Kayla explained they were looking into it. Bruce stepped forward, adding that he was personally pushing for it at the corporate level. As they wrapped up, Elena approached him with a clipboard. "I made some notes about ways to improve job flexibility. This might help single parents or folks caring for relatives." He scanned the paper, impressed by her thoroughness. "This is great. I'll share it at headquarters." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Also, my daughter's next checkup is in 2 weeks. If I need an extra day off, can I talk to you or Kayla directly?" He gave her a reassuring nod. "Absolutely. Just let me know." A small but genuine smile crossed her face, and Bruce felt a surge of determination. He needed to ensure these programs lasted, no matter what happened in Seattle or with the board. That evening, he called Timothy, requesting updated numbers on staff retention and productivity. He also compiled case studies of companies that had invested in community well-being without suffering financially. By midnight, he had a thick folder of evidence. Though exhaustion tugged at him, he felt a renewed clarity. The next step was a formal presentation to the board, where he'd argue that a real estate project in Seattle could be profitable without displacing vulnerable tenants if they reworked certain terms. It would be a battle. He suspected that some powerful interests, like Richard Nolan, would push back vehemently. As he finally set aside his work and prepared for sleep, he realized he was on the cusp of his largest confrontation yet. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week, and if they shot down his proposals, it would be a severe blow to everything he'd built so far. He might lose control of Ward Enterprises entirely, or at least lose enough influence to make further reforms impossible. Yet for all the looming uncertainty, he felt oddly calm. He had chosen this path, and turning back was no longer an option. The tension in the air was almost tangible, like the electric charge before a thunderstorm. He could only hope that his new convictions, along with the evidence he'd gathered, would be enough to weather the oncoming storm. A week after the tension-charged conversations at Ward Enterprises, Bruce found himself standing in the executive hallway outside the boardroom. He could practically feel the intensity emanating through the closed doors. Inside waited a group of people who might hold his professional fate in their hands. Richard Nolan among them, along with several cautious but influential members on the fence about Bruce's new direction. Bruce adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket, recalling the times he once strode into board meetings without a hint of nerves. Now, a distinct anxiety pooled in his stomach. Yet he also felt a rare surge of conviction. This was about more than personal pride or corporate numbers. It was about doing right by the people who worked for him and the communities affected by Ward Enterprises projects. He pushed open the doors, stepping into the spacious conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a sweeping view of Chicago's skyline. The board members were seated around a gleaming mahogany table. A hush fell over them as he approached, Timothy Brooks at his side, carrying the updated data folders. Martha Sullivan had been invited to observe as a guest advisor, and she offered Bruce a firm nod when their gazes met. Richard Nolan sat near the head of the table, his expression set in a perpetual scowl. "Shall we begin?" he asked curtly. Bruce took a seat at the head, Timothy by his right. "Thank you all for coming. I'll start with an overview of the pilot program at the Riverside Hotel." He opened a slideshow that displayed graphs showing improved staff retention, a modest rise in guest satisfaction scores, and anecdotal reports from employees. "You'll see that within just a few weeks, we've reduced turnover by 10%. Employees are more engaged. We even have early signs of improved operational efficiency, less absenteeism, fewer mistakes." Some of the board members leaned forward, intrigued, but Nolan barely moved. "What about the cost?" he demanded. Timothy flicked to a financial breakdown. "Thus far, the additional investment is modest. Over time, we expect even greater savings through lower turnover and better service. We propose extending these reforms in measured steps throughout our other properties." Martha spoke up. "These results align with what I've studied in socially responsible corporations. Short-term costs can lead to long-term gains, both financially and ethically." Nolan drummed his fingers on the table, unimpressed. "Fine, but we're not here just to talk about some hotel experiment. Let's address the real elephant, the Seattle expansion. I hear you want to impose relocation assistance and negotiate with local housing groups, effectively inflating our development costs." Bruce inhaled, bracing himself. "Yes, the current plan risks uprooting dozens, maybe hundreds of working-class residents. We can't ignore that. By cooperating with the community to establish fair relocation terms, we avoid lawsuits and negative press that could cost us more down the line." A petite board member named Sarah Michaels cleared her throat. "Couldn't we find a middle ground, perhaps a smaller relocation fund? We need to maintain a strong return for our investors." Bruce advanced the slideshow, revealing potential budget scenarios. "I've identified ways to trim the overall construction budget without sacrificing quality, like renegotiating supply contracts. We can allocate part of those savings to relocation. We'd also aim to partner with non-profits to streamline the process. This is an investment in brand reputation and ethical practice." Nolan shook his head, face darkening. "That's a gamble. And from what I see, it's a gamble with our bottom line." "Ward Enterprises isn't a charity," Bruce held Nolan's glare. "We don't have to be a charity to be responsible. If we proceed with zero regard for the families involved, the backlash could be far worse. Boycotts, lawsuits, government intervention, our track record matters." An uneasy silence filled the room. Timothy passed out the printed figures Bruce had compiled, showing how the pilot program's success could mirror a broader corporate strategy. A couple of directors studied the charts, nodding slowly. Nolan, however, wasn't yielding. Your mother was in real estate, right? She was evicted more than once, if I recall. Did that fuel this sudden bleeding heart stance? Is this personal for you? He leaned back, arms crossed, as though challenging Bruce to deny it. A sudden heat rose to Bruce's face. He felt Martha stiffen beside him. Yes, it is personal, Bruce answered evenly. I'm not ashamed of that. My experiences showed me what happens when business tramples vulnerable communities. It might have made me hungry for success back then, but it also taught me compassion. Nolan let out a derisive snort, but Bruce saw a few colleagues shift in their seats, expressions softening. Sarah Michaels finally spoke up. I'm inclined to support a trial period for these measures in Seattle, similar to the pilot at Riverside. If we see tangible benefits, real data, then we can proceed further. But we need to be very clear on metrics. Relief flickered through Bruce. We'll define metrics for job creation, local partnerships, and possible tax incentives from the city. Give us 6 months to prove it can work. As discussion continued, the tension in the air grew thick. Nolan still resisted, citing concerns about stock prices and immediate returns. Others noted that many consumers today favored ethically conscious companies. In the end, a narrow majority of the board agreed to Bruce's proposal, contingent on strict cost controls and a mid-term review. By the time the meeting adjourned, Bruce felt as though he'd run a marathon. He'd confronted his fiercest opposition and secured a fragile permission to move forward. Yet, he caught the cold stare from Nolan, who slipped out without a word. The victory felt precarious, like standing on newly cracked ice. But for now, this very moment, Bruce had won enough to keep fighting. After the meeting, Bruce retreated to his corner office, leaning against the wide glass window that overlooked Chicago's sprawling skyline. He had advocated for a more conscientious approach, and the board's conditional acceptance gave him room to act, but it came with a ticking clock. If the numbers didn't pan out in Seattle, he risked losing everything he'd built at Ward Enterprises. Martha Sullivan stepped in quietly. "You held your ground," she said with measured pride, "but you also painted a target on your back for Nolan and anyone who thinks like him." He turned to face her, exhaustion evident in his features. "I had no choice. If we push forward in Seattle without these measures, we'd be as heartless as the rest. If I fail, it'll be on me." She tapped a binder under her arm. "You won't fail if you assemble a reliable team. Remember, you're not alone. People like Timothy, Kayla, and even staff like Elena believe in you now." Bruce nodded gratefully. "I'll need all the help I can get." Martha left, promising to touch base soon. Bruce spent the rest of the afternoon poring over legal documents, city council letters, and spreadsheets that tracked everything from the pilot program's budget to potential relocation costs. By evening, his eyes burned from staring at the screen. Still, he pushed on, emailing updates to Timothy and Kayla about next steps. Around 8 o'clock, his phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Just letting you know my daughter is doing better. She says hi. Also, thanks for the new scheduling policy. Helped me a lot this week." A small smile tugged at the corners of Bruce's mouth. He typed a quick reply, "Glad to hear she's doing better. Let me know if you need anything else." Sending it, he realized how personal their exchange felt, so different from the professional distance he used to maintain with employees. Yet, it warmed him, reminding him why he'd risk upending old business models in the first place. He decided to call it a night. Driving home through the city's neon-lit streets, traffic was thin, allowing him to reach his penthouse in record time. Once inside, the quiet space enveloped him, a stark contrast to the day's tension. He grabbed a glass of water and stood by the window, noticing how the skyscrapers glowed in the darkness, symbols of both progress and corporate might. His mind drifted to the families in Seattle who faced possible eviction, Elena's daughter who needed medical care, and all the staff members who counted on these reforms not to vanish under board pressure. Every decision he made now rippled through countless lives. The weight of that truth settled heavily on his shoulders. The next morning, Bruce was up before dawn, reviewing a proposed timeline from the legal team. They wanted to push the Seattle negotiations through in just 3 months, aiming to finalize building permits. He saw no mention of the community outreach plan. Frustrated, he scribbled notes and fired off emails demanding that relocation talks be front and center before any final approvals. When he arrived at the office, Timothy approached with a stack of folders. Corporate Communications is drafting a press release about our pilot program. They think it might help offset the negative press over Seattle. Good idea, Bruce replied, flipping through the paperwork, but make sure it doesn't sound like a cheap PR stunt. We're serious about real change. Timothy nodded, but Bruce caught the man's furrowed brow. Everything okay? Bruce asked. Timothy paused, clearing his throat. It's Nolan. He's been making calls to some of our top shareholders, implying that you're sacrificing profits for personal reasons. I've tried to counter his narrative, but I'm not sure it's working. A jolt of anger sparked in Bruce. So he's actively undermining me? Looks that way, Timothy said quietly. He's pointing to possible cost overruns in Seattle, warning investors that our stock might drop if we go too soft. Bruce let out a slow breath, his jaw clenched. Let him talk. We'll prove him wrong with results. In the meantime, keep an eye on any internal moves he might make. The morning turned into a series of back-to-back calls. Bruce spoke with local officials in Seattle, trying to establish a framework for relocating tenants. He had to balance sounding assertive, proving Ward Enterprises took the matter seriously, while maintaining corporate goodwill. By noon, he felt drained, uncertain if he was achieving tangible progress or merely laying more groundwork. A short while later, he received an email from one of the city council members praising Ward Enterprises' willingness to engage, but hinting that activists and community groups remained suspicious. They demanded real guarantees, not just promises. Bruce stared at the message, recalling Elena's initial skepticism when he first offered help. Earning trust was never easy, and this was trust on an even larger scale. Sighing, he closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. The board might have temporarily approved his approach, but the real test would be implementing it under scrutiny and time pressure. He felt the weight of consequences from all sides. If he faltered, people would lose homes, employees' optimism would evaporate, and Ward Enterprises could crumble in the ensuing backlash. The stakes had never been higher, and he was all too aware that one wrong move could unravel everything. 2 days later, Bruce found himself on a plane bound for Seattle, accompanied by Kayla Sampson and a small team of advisors. They had scheduled meetings with city council representatives and local housing advocates. The flight was quiet. Most of his colleagues were reviewing documents or catching up on sleep. Bruce, however, remained alert, gripping a binder full of reports on relocation funding options. He used the downtime to mentally rehearse talking points, recalling how, in his youth, he and his mother had once faced the threat of eviction. That memory lent urgency to his cause. Yet, self-doubt nagged at him. Was he trying to redeem his own past? Or was he truly doing what was best for all involved? Upon landing, Bruce's team headed straight to a community center near downtown Seattle. The modest building had peeling paint and a mural that depicted a bustling, diverse neighborhood. Inside, they were greeted by a handful of local organizers, men and women of various ages, each wearing a mix of hopeful and cautious expressions. One organizer, a tall man named Malcolm Jones, stepped forward, Mr. Ward, we appreciate you coming. It's not often the CEO himself shows up to talk about something like this. Bruce offered a handshake. Please, call me Bruce. And I'm here because I want a solution that works for everyone, not just my corporation. The group moved into a small conference room, brightened by sunlight filtering through large windows. Outside, a playground echoed with children's laughter. Bruce couldn't help but think of Eleanor's daughter and how fragile that sense of normalcy could be if a family lost their home. Kayla unpacked her laptop and projected slides summarizing Ward Enterprises' proposed changes, relocation assistance, job opportunities at the new development, and an effort to preserve some of the existing affordable units. Malcolm and the others listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes or whispering to one another. When Bruce finished, an elderly woman named Rosa spoke up. It sounds good on paper, but we've heard promises before from big developers. They talk about community benefits, and then when costs run high, those benefits get cut. Bruce rested his hands on the table, meeting Rosa's gaze. I understand. If I were in your position, I'd be skeptical too. That's why we're offering a legally binding agreement. Our board has approved a pilot approach. If we falter, you'd have grounds to sue. Malcolm exchanged looks with the others. And what about accountability? You might be genuine, but what if your board changes its mind down the road? Kayla gestured to the slides. We plan to set up an oversight committee with community representatives who'll review our progress quarterly. We'll submit reports, and we invite local leaders to see the development process firsthand. A quiet, hopeful murmur rippled through the group. Rosa folded her arms. All right, that's a start. But we want written clauses ensuring we won't be left homeless during construction. Temporary housing, fair compensation, these are non-negotiable. Bruce nodded, taking notes himself. Understood. We'll incorporate those points into the contract. This is exactly why we came in person, to hear what you need, not just assume we know. For the next hour, the two sides hashed out details, forging a blueprint for relocating tenants and ensuring job placements. Occasionally, tensions spiked, especially when cost figures were mentioned, but Kayla skillfully navigated those moments, bridging the gap between the corporate perspective and the community's demands. By the end, they drafted a preliminary outline of what would be a final agreement if both parties stayed true to their word. As they stood to leave, Malcolm extended a handshake. We're cautiously optimistic. Thank you for taking this seriously. Bruce gripped his hand firmly. Thank you for giving us a chance. I promise I'll fight for these commitments back at Ward Enterprises. Outside, the late afternoon sun glinted off the glass towers of downtown Seattle. Kayla tucked her laptop under her arm, walking beside Bruce. You realize we're committing the company to some major expenses, she said, voice reflecting both concern and admiration. He nodded, gazing out at the city. If it means people keep their homes and we still move forward with a responsible project, then it's worth it. That's the transformation I'm after. They headed back to their rental car, feeling a cautious uplift. For once, Bruce saw the outlines of a path where the community wouldn't be sacrificed in the name of profit. Yet, beneath the sense of accomplishment lay the ever-present awareness of how precarious it all was. Nolan and his allies would not welcome these new financial burdens. The question remained whether the board would honor the commitments Bruce had just made, or if they'd revolt once the costs became all too real. The day after returning to Chicago, Bruce dove into back-to-back meetings to integrate Seattle's community demands into official corporate documents. He consulted with Timothy, Kayla, and even looped in an external legal team to ensure the relocation clauses had enough bite to be enforceable. His office became a flurry of activity, papers strewn across the desk, a constant stream of phone calls, and staff members hurrying in and out with updates. At one point, Elena texted him, "Any updates on Seattle?" a sign that she, too, was following the situation closely. Bruce paused for a moment to reply, "Just got back." Making progress. Hard battles still ahead. He stared at his screen, recalling her weary expression from the hospital waiting room. If he could lessen such burdens for other families, he'd consider it a victory worth any corporate blowback. He was about to return to a conference call when Timothy knocked on his door, face taut. "Nolan wants to see you." Bruce's stomach tightened. "Now." "He's in the executive lounge," Timothy answered. "Said it's urgent." With a curt nod, Bruce followed Timothy down the sleek hallway, passing framed photographs of Ward Enterprises' biggest achievements: towering skyscrapers, fancy hotels, and multi-billion-dollar trade deals. They arrived at the executive lounge, a plush space with modern furniture and a panoramic window overlooking the river. Nolan stood by the glass, hands clasped behind him, posture rigid. "Ah, Bruce," he said, turning with a tight-lipped smile. "We need to talk." His voice dripped with a calm that felt more ominous than reassuring. Timothy discreetly slipped away, leaving them alone. Bruce crossed the room, noticing the tension crackling in the air. "You wanted a word." Nolan nodded, motioning for him to sit in one of the low-slung leather chairs. "Let's not pretend we're friends," he began. "I have significant concerns about your reckless spending on these so-called community benefits in Seattle." Bruce sat down, folding his arms. "They're not reckless. We have data to back up the long-term value of a socially responsible approach." Nolan scoffed. "I'm sure you've got data, but I've spoken to a number of shareholders, and they're worried. Our stock has dipped slightly on rumors that we'll bear millions in extra costs. Investors want profitability, not charity." Bruce resisted the urge to snap back. "Investors also want stability. If we bulldoze neighborhoods, lawsuits will pile up. Bad press will tarnish Ward Enterprises' image. That could cost us more than a dip in stock price." Nolan's expression hardened. "Perhaps, but let me be clear. I won't watch you turn this business into a social experiment. We have expansion goals, and you're derailing them with these pilot programs and relocation deals. If you don't correct course soon, the board has ways to force your hand." A prickling sense of danger rose in Bruce. "I'm the CEO. These reforms are within my authority, backed by a board vote." He tried to keep his voice steady, though adrenaline spiked in his veins. Nolan stepped closer, voice dropping. "That vote was narrowly won, and only because some members trust your business acumen. The second they see a downturn in quarterly reports, they'll blame you and side with me. Don't forget that you serve at the pleasure of the board." Bruce stood, leveling his gaze. "If you're threatening to oust me, just say it, but I won't abandon these people, staff or community members. We can be profitable without being cruel." "You might not believe that, but I do." Nolan let out a mirthless chuckle. "Oh, I'm not threatening. I'm warning you. We'll push you out if you keep this up. Think of your legacy, Bruce. You want to be remembered as the CEO who lost everything trying to be a hero." An uneasy silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the lounge's air conditioning. Finally, Bruce answered, voice resolute. "I'd rather lose my title than my conscience. I've seen what happens when we ignore people's suffering, and I won't do it again." Nolan pressed his lips together, turning back to gaze out the window. "Suit yourself. But remember, I've been in this game a long time. When the numbers come in and they're not what you promised, don't expect any mercy from me or the board." Without another word, Bruce strode out of the lounge, his heart hammering. The confrontation had been blunt, reflecting a deeper fracture within the company. As he returned to his office, he found Timothy waiting. "Everything all right?" the CFO asked, concern etched in his features. Not exactly, Bruce admitted, sinking into his chair. Nolan is moving against me, but we stick to the plan. Shore up the Seattle agreement, finalize the pilot program expansions, and keep the board updated. We'll show them the numbers soon enough. Timothy nodded, though his eyes hinted at worry. I'll make sure we have solid metrics. Just be careful, Bruce. Nolan's the type who plays dirty. Bruce let out a slow exhale, the weight of leadership heavier than ever. I know, but we don't have a choice. This is the right thing to do. That night, he stayed at the office until the early hours, combing through financial models and drafting new justifications for each expense. The final push to prove his vision's worth lay ahead, and if Nolan made good on his threats, Bruce needed every advantage he could muster. In the days following his tense exchange with Nolan, Bruce orchestrated a series of major moves to strengthen his position and ensure the Seattle deal's success. First, he arranged a press conference where Ward Enterprises publicly announced its commitment to community-friendly development. The statement garnered mixed reactions. Local media applauded the initiative, while some financial analysts questioned how it would impact earnings. Next, Bruce requested a thorough audit of the pilot program at the Riverside Hotel, generating fresh data that showed real improvements in employee satisfaction, operational efficiency, and guest reviews. Kayla prepared an in-depth report for the board, complete with testimonials from staff. He hoped that seeing faces and reading personal stories might sway any undecided members. While these efforts brought some positive momentum, he could sense an undercurrent of tension throughout the company. Rumors swirled that Nolan was gathering support to call an emergency board meeting, one that could potentially strip Bruce of his CEO title if shareholder confidence didn't improve. One evening, as Bruce was packing up his briefcase to leave the office, he glanced at his phone. A text from Elena read, "Any news about the Seattle vote? Heard some rumors it might be cancelled." Bruce felt his chest tighten. He quickly replied, "Not cancelled. We're moving forward. I'll explain soon." He decided to drop by the Riverside Hotel to check in with the staff lounge, a place that had become a kind of informal checkpoint for him. When he arrived, a few housekeeping employees were finishing their shifts, exchanging friendly banter. Linda and Jason spotted him first, beckoning him over to a table near a bulletin board plastered with staff notices and birthday announcements. "Big boss is here," Jason joked, though his eyes held genuine respect. "We saw the press release. Sounds serious." Bruce nodded, scanning the group for Elena. She was absent, likely dealing with her daughter's care. "We're trying to secure the next phase of the pilot program. I also want to replicate it in other properties," he said. "It's an uphill climb, but I'm not giving up." Linda lowered her voice, concern evident. "We've heard rumors that you're under fire from some bigwigs. Is that true?" A moment of hesitation passed. Bruce chose honesty. "Yes, it's true. But that's part of the battle for change in a corporation. Not everyone wants it, especially if they think it's cutting into profits." Jason leaned forward. "So what happens if they push you out?" Bruce swallowed. "I'm not sure. I hope it doesn't come to that. But if it does, at least we've put new systems in place, raised awareness, and proven that employees matter. I'd hope the board wouldn't just dismantle everything." A few staff members exchanged worried glances, but Bruce's words also seemed to galvanize them. Linda touched his arm gently. "We support you, Bruce. A lot of us do. You've changed things here in ways we never thought possible." Buoyed by their encouragement, Bruce headed out into the cool night air. He checked his phone again, this time a missed call from Martha. Stepping to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, he returned the call. She answered swiftly, her voice tinged with urgency. "Bruce, I just got word that Nolan might have the votes to call a special shareholder session next week. They could force a no-confidence vote in your leadership." Despite being mentally prepared for such a possibility, Hearing it spoken aloud made his heart lurch. "So soon?" he asked, voice lower than he intended. "I thought we had time to show results." "That's the thing," Martha replied. "He's trying to do it before your reforms can fully demonstrate their benefits. He's pressing the narrative that you're sacrificing immediate returns and risking the company's stability." Bruce pressed his lips together. "Thanks for the heads up. I'll gather everything we have, metrics, testimonies, future projections. We'll need to make a compelling case to shareholders." Martha's voice softened. "I believe in you. But remember, even if you lose the title of CEO, you haven't lost your vision or your moral compass. Sometimes real change requires stepping into the fire." He ended the call, standing there for a moment in the hushed hotel lobby. In the background, guests checked in at the gleaming reception desk, oblivious to the corporate drama unfolding behind the scenes. Bruce felt a swirl of determination and dread. He'd come so far, risked so much, and it still might not be enough to safeguard the reforms he'd begun. Yet as he stared at the ornate chandelier overhead, he recalled Elena's quiet gratitude, the relief of employees who finally had a safety net, and the cautious hope in the Seattle community negotiations. Even if the board turned on him, those changes were already in motion, and that fact offered a measure of solace. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his shoulders and walked out into the night. A showdown was coming, one that would test not only his leadership, but the very nature of Ward Enterprises. He stood on the edge, ready to defend what he believed in, no matter the personal cost. Bruce stared at his own reflection in the polished elevator doors as he ascended to the top floor of Ward Enterprises headquarters. The special shareholder session loomed, called by Richard Nolan and his allies to challenge Bruce's leadership. In the days leading up to this moment, rumors had run rampant across the corporate grapevine. Some whispered that Bruce would be forced out by lunchtime. Others speculated a miracle might occur if he proved that ethical responsibility and profit could coexist. On his way up, he checked his phone for messages. Elena had sent a text wishing him luck, adding a small note about her daughter feeling better after a recent doctor's visit. He responded with a simple thanks, drawing encouragement from the knowledge that at least one part of his life, helping Eleanor find stability, had gone right. He also had messages from Timothy Brooks, promising he'd wrangled enough data to show how the Seattle plan and the Riverside Hotel pilot could yield long-term gains. When the elevator doors slid open, he stepped into a crowd of sharply dressed individuals. Shareholders from various parts of the country had flown in. Some regarded Bruce with polite but distant nods, their loyalties uncertain. Others, especially the older board members, pointedly avoided his gaze. Martha Sullivan stood near the entrance to the conference hall, giving him a supportive smile. He felt a surge of gratitude for her presence, even as tension coiled inside him. They filed into the ornate meeting room, where seats formed a semicircle around a small podium. Richard Nolan was already perched near the front, exuding a poised confidence. Timothy scurried over to Bruce, straightening his tie. "I've got the slides. Everything is set," Timothy whispered. "Don't let Nolan bully you." Bruce nodded, every muscle in his body rigid. He stepped to the podium and cleared his throat, greeting the assembly. "Thank you all for coming," he began, projecting as much calm as he could muster. "We're here because questions have been raised about my recent strategies, namely the pilot program at the Riverside Hotel and our revised approach to the Seattle development." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bruce clicked a remote, and a screen behind him displayed graphs and bullet points. "You'll see that at the Riverside property, employee turnover has dropped significantly, saving us considerable recruiting costs. Guest satisfaction is up, which increases brand loyalty. In Seattle, we've negotiated a relocation plan that involves partnering with local housing advocates to ensure minimal displacement. In return, we gain community support and avoid legal battles that could be far more expensive. He then gestured to Timothy, who presented short interviews with Riverside employees, frontline workers describing how flexible schedules and healthcare support had alleviated financial strain. One video featured a housekeeping staff member detailing how she no longer needed to juggle 2 jobs to afford her child's medication. A collective hush settled in as the personal stories unfolded. Yet, Nolan seized his turn the moment Timothy finished. Standing, he spoke with clipped precision. While these heartwarming anecdotes are all well and good, shareholders need to look at the bigger picture. Our stock price slipped by nearly 2% last quarter amid worries about these added social costs. We risk further decline if we continue on this path. He folded his arms, sending a cold stare Bruce's way. Mr. Ward may be well-intentioned, but if his approach jeopardizes our financial standing, we must consider whether he remains the right leader for Ward Enterprises. A man in the back, a major investor from California, raised his hand. Nolan has a point. Investors want to see immediate returns. Can you guarantee we won't face additional unplanned expenditures in Seattle? Bruce inhaled. We can't predict every obstacle, but we've built contingency funds into the budget. This approach prevents lawsuits, protests, and potential delays. In fact, the city is more likely to expedite our permits because we're demonstrating responsibility. That saves time and money. An older woman in the front row, her expression pensive, rose to speak. The pilot project's numbers are encouraging, but so is the caution that Mr. Nolan raises. Perhaps the question is whether we can implement these programs without severely impacting profit margins. Is that feasible? Timothy stepped in, clicking to a final slide that showed a cost-benefit analysis. We project modest short-term expenses, but stable or even increased profitability within 2 years. A workforce that feels supported tends to be more loyal, and the Seattle community's buy-in could generate positive press and goodwill. Some shareholders took notes, while others shared skeptical glances. Nolan attempted a retort, but before he could speak, Martha Sullivan was recognized. She stood calmly, addressing the room in a measured tone. Ward Enterprises can be on the cutting edge of modern corporate ethics, she said. This is not mere altruism, it's strategic foresight. Companies that adapt to social expectations thrive in the long run. A tense silence followed. The board chairwoman announced they would proceed with a vote of confidence. Either they reaffirm Bruce as CEO and continue his programs, or they move to install new leadership that might reverse them. People lined up at a set of electronic polling stations, scanning their ID badges to cast votes. Bruce stepped aside, his heart pounding. Timothy gave him a quick, reassuring pat on the back, but Bruce could only stare as the lines moved slowly, each shareholder making a choice that could determine his future and the fate of Ward Enterprises' new direction. After the votes were cast, an anxious hush descended on the room. One by one, the results flashed onto a large digital display mounted on the wall. At first, Bruce couldn't make sense of the percentages flickering across the screen. Then the final tally appeared, sending an electric jolt through everyone present. Retain Bruce Ward as CEO, 51.8%. Replace CEO, 48.2%. A ripple of astonishment spread throughout the crowd. Bruce registered the narrow margin, realizing how close he'd come to losing his position. Relief warred with lingering dread, knowing that nearly half the shareholders wanted him gone. He maintained a measured expression, though his pulse throbbed in his temples. Nolan stood near the board chairwoman, his jaw visibly clenched. He tapped his phone quickly, likely texting his supporters. Some on the board appeared quietly relieved, others disappointed. Timothy released a breath he seemed to have been holding for minutes, and Martha Sullivan allowed herself a faint, proud smile. Stepping back to the podium, Bruce cleared his throat. "I want to thank everyone who participated in this vote. I promise to remain transparent about our financial outcomes. I also promise to uphold our commitment to ethical expansion. What enterprises will demonstrate that profitability and humanity can coexist?" The chairwoman nodded, wrapping up with formalities and adjourning the session. A swirl of voices erupted as shareholders milled around, either congratulating Bruce in clipped tones or steering clear altogether. Nolan slipped out with a tight-lipped nod, leaving behind a small pack of associates who wore matching scowls. Martha approached Bruce, offering a handshake that transitioned into a reassuring pat on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly, "but be mindful. This margin means the board will scrutinize every decision. You'll need to prove your strategy works, or you could face another vote soon." Bruce managed a dry smile. "I'm aware, but for now, we have the mandate to keep moving forward." Timothy arrived, phone in hand, eyebrows raised. Press is already covering the vote. Some are calling it a surprising moral victory. Others say it's too close for comfort. He lowered his voice. "We should do a brief statement for the media, emphasizing our plans and inviting them to revisit the numbers in a few months." Bruce nodded in agreement. "Yes, let's get ahead of the narrative." Turning to Martha, he added, "Thank you for standing by me. I'll lean on your support as we roll out these reforms." They left the conference hall together, heading down the corridor toward Bruce's office. At times like this, the city skyline beyond the windows felt more like a watchful audience than a mere backdrop. He couldn't shake the sense that every move he made was being judged, and not just by the shareholders, but by the employees depending on him to deliver real change. Back in the office, Bruce found a message from Eleanor asking if he was all right. Deciding to share the news in person, he called her. "Would you meet me for coffee at the Riverside Hotel's cafe? I'd like to talk." "Sure," she answered, sounding curious. "I'm here anyway for a shift." An hour later, Bruce sat at a small table in the hotel cafe. Through the glass doors, he could see the hustle of the lobby, conference attendees coming and going. He still wore the same suit from the shareholder meeting, but he felt lighter, partly from relief, partly from anticipation of seeing Elena. When she arrived, she looked weary but determined, her dark curls pulled back in a neat bun. She carried a folder of documents under one arm. "Hi," she said, sliding into the seat. "You look like you've had a day." He exhaled a short laugh. "You could say that." Keeping his voice low, he told her about the vote, how narrowly he'd retained his position, and the implications for the pilot program. She studied him quietly as he spoke, her eyes flickering with relief. "I'm glad. You did all this for people you don't even know," she said, a mix of gratitude and wonder in her tone. "And for me, I guess." Bruce shrugged, feeling oddly vulnerable. "Meeting you reminded me of how I grew up, what it feels like to have to fight for every inch of dignity. I built an empire partly to escape that, but now I realize I can't escape my past. Maybe I shouldn't want to." Elena reached across the table, giving his hand a light squeeze. "I know it's complicated, but thank you for sticking your neck out. You gave a lot of folks here real hope." The moment held a subtle warmth, tinged with mutual respect. Bruce felt the tension of the day slip away, replaced by something gentler. "I'm just glad I can continue, at least for now. We have a lot of work ahead, especially in Seattle." She nodded, tapping the folder she'd brought. "I actually have a few more suggestions from employees about the pilot program, ways to streamline the scheduling requests and reduce confusion with HR. If you want them." He smiled. "Absolutely." Let's take a look. They pored over her notes, quietly discussing each point as the steady hum of the hotel lobby provided background noise. Outside the cafe window, Chicago's late afternoon sun cast long rays onto the marble floors. For Bruce, the day had been a whirlwind of politics, but here, collaborating with Elena over something tangible and important, he felt an unexpected calm. Over the following weeks, Bruce set about ensuring that every corner of Ward Enterprises felt the impact of his renewed leadership. He and Timothy organized a series of internal town halls, both online and in person, where employees could directly ask questions and offer input. Some of these sessions took place at the Riverside Hotel, others at company offices across the city. Bruce insisted that high-level managers attend so they could hear unfiltered perspectives. One evening, he arrived at a suburban branch of Ward Enterprises, where a crowd of mostly middle management staff had gathered in a modest auditorium. He stood on a small stage, explaining the broader vision for socially responsible development. We want to ensure that the principles we tested in the hotel pilot, better healthcare coverage, flexible scheduling, support for career growth, become embedded across our properties. That means we need your help in identifying what each site needs most. A manager named Sophie raised her hand. Our office deals with real estate licensing. How do we ensure we're not contributing to displacing families, like what happened in Seattle? Bruce nodded. That's exactly the kind of question we want you to ask. I'm finalizing guidelines that require thorough community impact assessments before greenlighting any property deals. Every department will be accountable for enforcing those guidelines. The applause that followed was cautious but genuine. People seemed curious to see if these directives would truly influence corporate culture or fade once a financial crunch arose. Yet, with the vote of confidence in place, however narrow, Bruce held enough authority to push forward, at least for now. Later, he reconvened with Timothy in the auditorium's empty backstage area, both men looking drained but accomplished. Timothy handed Bruce a stack of new suggestions scribbled on feedback cards. "It's amazing, you know," Timothy remarked. "A year ago, we wouldn't have had employees so openly sharing ideas about how to change corporate policy." Bruce skimmed a few cards, reading heartfelt pleas for more mentorship programs and safer workplace environments. People feel more invested if they know their voices matter. It's not just me who's done this. You played a big role too, Tim. Timothy looked a bit sheepish. I was skeptical, but I'm starting to see the benefits. Morale is improving, and that might translate to better performance in the long run. They were interrupted by a text on Bruce's phone. Elena again, letting him know her daughter had a routine checkup the next day, but was otherwise stable. She thanked him for putting her in touch with a specialized children's clinic. Bruce responded with a simple thumbs-up emoji, a subtle warmth flaring in his chest. The next day, he arrived at the Riverside Hotel around lunchtime, intending to discuss progress with Kayla Sampson, the pilot program coordinator. In the staff lounge, he found Eleanor chatting with Linda Parker and Jason Miller. A wave of familiarity washed over him, recalling how he once felt so out of place in these corridors. "Bruce," Jason called, "we just heard about that new set of guidelines for expansions. They're posted on the intranet. That's big news." Bruce gave a modest shrug. "It's a start. I'm aware that a guideline only matters if we enforce it, but it's something tangible." Linda patted Elena's shoulder. "Also, I hear some folks from corporate are drafting a policy for childcare support. Any updates on that?" Before Bruce could answer, Kayla entered with a tablet in hand. "Yes, we're doing a feasibility study now. If we can prove it saves money by reducing absenteeism, the board might approve a partial childcare subsidy. Early numbers look promising." Eleanor's eyes lit up. That could help so many single parents here, myself included. Bruce felt a surge of pride seeing employees talk about these changes with genuine hope. "Keep the pressure on," he said lightly. "We need your voices to back us up when we present final proposals." Kayla glanced at her tablet, then back at Bruce. "Oh, and the relocation efforts in Seattle. There's a community meeting next week. Malcolm Jones from the advocacy group wants to make sure you or a senior representative is there. He's eager to finalize the legally binding parts of that arrangement." Bruce nodded. "I'll attend in person. Let's finalize the date." The day flowed in a steady hum of collaboration, with staff dropping by to ask questions and offer further suggestions. As evening approached, Bruce found himself in the quiet hallway near the housekeeping supply room, reminiscing about the first time he had stumbled across Eleanor. He realized how drastically his perspective had changed since then, how much more meaningful his role felt now that he wasn't just chasing profits. He overheard a pair of employees discussing the pilot program, one telling the other how relieved she was to finally get consistent shifts that allowed her to see her kids' school events. It struck him how these small changes could ripple through families, shaping happier, more stable lives. The thought steadied him, fueling his determination to continue expanding such policies despite the obstacles looming in the boardroom. With several weeks of steady progress behind them, Bruce felt ready to sign the final relocation agreement in Seattle. He flew out once again, meeting Malcolm Jones and the local advocates at the same community center they'd gathered in before. This time, the mood was upbeat. Ward Enterprises had negotiated a binding contract to cover relocation costs and, where possible, incorporate affordable units into the development. Local housing groups would oversee compliance, ensuring the company kept its promises. After the formalities, Malcolm insisted on taking Bruce to a nearby cafe for a celebratory cup of coffee. They chatted about next steps, hiring local residents for construction jobs, setting up job fairs for ongoing positions, and continuing to refine the relocation plan. To Bruce's relief, the tension that had once defined their meetings now felt replaced by a cautious, hopeful collaboration. That evening, back in Chicago, Bruce dropped by the Riverside Hotel to share the news and found Elena finishing her shift. They stepped into the bustling hotel lobby, its grand chandeliers reflecting a soft glow on marble floors. She regarded him curiously. "You're smiling. Good news." He nodded. "We signed the agreement. The Seattle development is a go, with full relocation terms. No one will be forced out without support, and some units will remain affordable in the new complex." Her lips parted in a broad smile. "That's wonderful." She started to say something else, but hesitated. "Well, I'm off soon. Want to grab a quick dinner or a coffee? I feel like celebrating your victory, even if it's a small one." Something in her tone made his chest tighten with warmth. He agreed, and they headed to a nearby diner. It was a modest place, with red vinyl booths and a neon sign flickering outside. They settled in a corner booth. The server brought water and menus, leaving them to the quiet hum of overhead lights. Eleanor set down her menu, folding her hands. "I wanted to tell you something. My daughter's health has improved a lot with this new treatment plan, and I realized I can't keep working double shifts forever. I'm thinking about applying for one of the new administrative roles the pilot program opened. I'm nervous, but I need a change." Bruce leaned forward. "That's fantastic news. You'd be great in a role that uses your organizational skills." "Don't doubt yourself," she exhaled, looking at him with a mixture of relief and lingering uncertainty. "It feels huge, switching from cleaning to a desk job, but if there's a chance, I have to take it." She paused, then continued softly. "And it's because of what you started here. I wanted to thank you, not just for me, but for everyone who feels they finally have options." A lump rose in his throat. "I thank you for saying that." But it's not just me. So many people, including you, pushed me to see what really matters. You didn't let me off easy, her expression softened, because I never wanted pity, just a fair shot. She glanced around the diner, the air smelling faintly of coffee and grilled onions. That day you walked into the ladies' restroom, it felt like my lowest moment, but it also led to all of this. He managed a small laugh, remembering how mortified he'd been. I was about to turn and run, but something made me stay, and look where that moment led us. They placed orders for burgers and fries, the conversation flowing into shared stories. Elena spoke about her childhood in a working-class Chicago neighborhood, the joys and heartbreak of raising her daughter alone. Bruce opened up about his mother's struggles, the relentless drive that fueled him to build an empire, and how emptiness crept in once he achieved it. Eventually, the plates were cleared away and they lingered over coffee. Outside, the neon sign flickered in the night, casting an uneven glow on their table. Elena looked at him, head tilted. So, what now? You've won this battle, but you still have so much going on at Ward Enterprises. He traced the rim of his mug. I have to prove to the shareholders that we can maintain profits while continuing these reforms. We've taken some big steps forward, but every quarter brings new scrutiny. She touched the back of his hand. You know, not everything can be solved in a quarter. Sometimes, real change takes years. He flipped his palm, lacing his fingers gently through hers. I'm willing to give it that time. A warmth spread between them, unspoken but undeniable. Something had shifted, a deeper connection forged by mutual respect and shared hardship. They eventually paid the bill and stepped outside. The city air was cool, a soft breeze carrying the distant rumble of nighttime traffic. Bruce looked at the glow of skyscrapers in the distance, each building a testament to ambition and power. He remembered how those symbols had once meant everything to him, yet now felt overshadowed by a quieter sense of purpose. Elena stood beside him, her presence steady, her eyes reflecting a kind of hard-earned hope. They walked side by side, neither in a hurry, content with this small, honest moment in the midst of all that had changed and all that might still unfold. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.